You're watching live, but we had the time to get together with the director of Tolkien. That'll be Mr. Dome Karukoski. He is joining us today for a very special anniversary screening of his wonderful biography film starring Lily Collins and Nicholas Hoult. Tolkien is what we're going to watch today. We have a wonderful experience prepared for all of you guys. So welcome to theonering.net. This is the world's largest web portal for all the Tolkien fans. And if you're here, you're going to have to get ready because we're doing a watch along. Get your Blu-ray or get your copy on Amazon or on iTunes Store, and even it's on HBO right now. So get your streaming service up, get your screens ready, and get yourself a bag of popcorn and a delicious beverage. We're going to sit down with Dome Karukoski, and we'll give you the countdown in a couple of minutes. I'm going to bring him on board and introduce him to all the ladies and gentlemen. And here we are. This is him, all the way from Finland. Welcome. It's so good to have you here with us, Dome. Great to see you, sir.
Hello, kiitos, as we say in Finnish. That means thank you. And those who speak Kenya might, catch a few words.
I know how to say tak tak from your your friends in Sweden.
Yes, from neighbors. Yeah, that's also like you could call the Old Norse languages, which is Sweden. So goddag, hur mår du? Är det bra över där?
That's great to see you. You look healthy. You look wonderful. How are you doing in your corner of the world as this craziness goes around? You doing all right?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers aren't that big here in Finland. So, and we did a lockdown quite early. We succeeded somehow protecting the risk groups and the older people, and so we're doing relatively fine. And now things are opening up, schools are opening up, and knock on wood. But
That's
I'm good. My family's good, and I always think about my issues are quite small. I think there's a lot of people who are losing their jobs, and I worry about those people more than myself at the moment.
Yes, here in Los Angeles, we're only a few days away from all kinds of things opening up again, and it's going to be quite interesting. But while we're still here at home today, we're providing an opportunity for all the fans to get their Blu-ray in their player, and we're going to watch this film together. We're going to do a very quick introduction, but you guys keep in mind there's 10 seconds maybe of spinning the platter in your Blu-ray. If you're watching on HBO, there's an additional logo for the streaming service, and then there's the PG-13 parental guidance screen. So get ready right up to the point of the Fox Searchlight logo. Everybody at home, when we begin, we'll have a countdown clock on the screen. Thank you to our producer, Justin, for helping us with that. And anybody else who's following along later on can advance the film right up to that countdown clock so you can watch along with myself and our illustrious director, Dome. He's here. He's going to offer ideas and insights, and we're going to talk about this wonderful movie, Tolkien, on its 1-year anniversary of being released. Now, it was put out by Fox Searchlight, and something that was just brought to my attention, this was the last film put out by Fox Searchlight, which has been a significant player in the indie film world, and then they shuttered. They closed their doors. Dome, this is great. What a beautiful swan song for Fox Searchlight, and how exciting to have been able to get into the life of our favorite author. You were in a rare position, Dome. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Disney bought the Fox Film Studios, and then they altered the name to Searchlight Pictures. And I'm not aware of the latest strategical changes. But of course, after this, they released under Disney banner, they released Jojo Rabbit and Lucy in the Sky, I believe was the name in English. And now this year they're coming up with hopefully with new films once the cinemas open. But it is true that the people I talk to, I don't feel there's that much of a change after the Disney acquiring them, and I feel that they are the same passionate film people. I think that's what's special about Fox Searchlight, or was special about Fox Searchlight, and hopefully stays in Searchlight Pictures. that is, it's quite filled with, passionate cinema people that you don't necessarily always meet in Hollywood, as they say, unfortunately.
That's excellent. Now, we also have a lot of passionate fans within the world of Tolkien fandom, as you know. And when your film came out, you must have realized you were going to be up against it, in a sense, that you were bringing your unique interpretation, which I found very poetic and very moving. And yet you found, Neil Gaiman loved this movie, and Brian Sibley, he's a noted Tolkien scholar and a friend of the OneRing.net. And then Brian Sibley loved it, and all these luminaries and writers who have been influenced by Tolkien really enjoyed this film. Stephen Colbert, of course, who is America's great living Tolkien guy. And then there's the people who came out and said, wait a minute, you missed a beat. What about this Catholicism and that you barely scratched the surface of the story? And coming at it now a year later, tell me how you feel, Dome, about the way that people have absorbed and responded to your work.
I think I often come to the preface of Lord of the Rings, what the professor himself wrote, and I read it a couple times. Now I have small kids, so there's no time to read. But let's say, when's the last time I read the book? 4 years ago, 3 years ago. But the preface, I think, very beautifully expresses through his words, how he is his own biggest critic. How namely, he thinks Lord of the Rings. Some people have called it long and boring, but he thinks himself is short. It's too short, and it goes to like these people who have commented on that he's gotten some criticism out are people that he doesn't value their work, or he's not interested in their work. He's mainly focused in what he feels. And I think that, you might think that's elitist, but at the end of the day, it's something that is the vital, essential element. Do you allow yourself to be, designed or evaluated by others and that affect you? Or do you listen, but still keep the most important what your own feelings are? For me, having dinner with George R.R. Martin, and I watched all the Game of Thrones, and discussing how he felt about the film and how he, experienced, enjoyed it, was one of the great moments, of my career. You're talking about a person who grew up with Tolkien even more than I did, and I consider myself a fan. And then you have, all those people that mentioned that have expressed, and Neil Gaiman, I think he released a 1-minute YouTube video or something praising the film or something, and I love his version of Norse mythology. So you look at the person that you idolize yourself and loving the film. Yet at the same time, you can't, you have to understand, for people who are Catholics, religion is very important for them. Tolkien is a very important, essential figure for them, and Catholicism is very instrumental in his work. But what we have to understand, it's instrumental in his later work, especially Lord of the Rings. Yes. Silmarillion, yes, it's, Silmarillion, when you read the Silmarillion, I read it twice, because the first time I didn't understand. I was too young. I was just like, okay, this is... You and I both had that issue, yes. Exactly. Then you had to read it twice, and now I understand. So this is,
Precisely.
And then slow. So I think, and the Valaquenta, just like you have to read Valaquenta, I think 7 times to understand all the names and who is who, and, who's,
density.
Yeah, but now it's become my favorite book. And when you read it and you look at the stories, Elendil and all that, those are very Christian in their essence. But at the same time, there's also so much influence from the Norse mythologies. There's so much influence from the Icelandic mythologies, the Finnish mythology, Kalevala. So you can't say that it's just Catholic. And so so then you come to the solution of a film director. Try to keep this short. I love talking, so bear with me. It's always an adaptation. Yes. Peter Jackson adapted, Concerning Hobbits into Bilbo's mouth, into a voiceover in the beginning of Fellowship of the Rings. He shortened it. That's his adaptation.
And then he ultimately cut it. It wasn't even in the theatrical version.
Yeah. So exactly. So so it's always an adaptation, and then even though it's a real life character, you're looking at it as an adaptation. What is essential for me as an artist, or in this case, two writers? What is essential for us about his life that feels that is, so we can make it into a 2-hour movie. And there you come. So we chose the themes. You can't, if you start trying to get all the themes, religion, love, friendship, loss, family, finding a home. I think in his works and his life, the theme of home is very important. If you try to get all that, you just end up with a Wikipedia movie, just like trying to mess everything there. So you have to choose, and that's where adaptation comes. And I think we chose, and I think I still stand behind that we chose that the main themes are, think about loss, about how art can help the feelings of grief. And I think especially that era of his youth is defined by a loss, loss of parents, loss of friends during the First World War. And I think that defines his work. And secondly, the theme of friendship, that defines his work. And, everybody who's read any of his work, all of his works are very much defined by friendship, betrayal, and the need, to stand behind your friends. So I think those comes out, that's something that comes out of the character. So these are the defining themes. And then, of course, I might criticize myself on the DVD. Those who have, there's a DVD extra of a cut scene where young Tolkien helps Father Francis in his work as a minister, as a priest. And I think that would have protected the film for those who are like, okay, I'm a Catholic and I need to see religion. Keeping that in the film, I say it would have protected the film. But at the time when we were cutting and editing, it felt like the film doesn't flow. The energy of the film doesn't flow well enough. So you have to lose something. And the film and the scene didn't have conflict. It didn't have a conflict where he would be, as a young Tolkien, like, I hate you, Father Francis, I hate religion. And, if you have a scene that lacks conflict, it becomes exposition, and that's where you run into problems. So thus is the reason why it was cut away, not because I am anti-Catholic or something. And to end my long monologue, film is about choices. We did choices, and we're going to watch it now. It's been a year since I watched it. There's some things that I probably would have done a little differently. That's what is the growth of an artist. But there are
it's been a whole year. It's been a whole year for you. Well, then let's get. This is exciting to be able to revisit this with you after the time and the perspective that you have now. Yeah. I'm very intrigued by this, and I, for one, appreciate your level of discernment. And I really appreciate the choices you made, because the romance and the emphasis on loss is what pulled my heart in every direction. And I love this. Let's begin, everybody. I want to give a countdown clock. We'll give a 10-second countdown to the audience. And then we'll begin the movie, because you guys have had enough time to prepare. I'm sure by now you have gotten the thing up on your streaming service and maybe got your Blu-ray spinning and it's on pause. But if you were here at the Fox Searchlight logo, we're going to begin the movie and we'll watch together. You ready? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Play. Here we go. Look at those spotlights. Oh, that looks like Los Angeles.
It's often what you do in films that you don't necessarily need to use the voice or the music, the original music. You can start your sound design, and the studio, especially Searchlight Pictures, allows the artist to start the film sound design early. And I was thinking about it, whether you should start with something. There's a nice tradition in it that it's actually Thomas Newman's father. Thomas Newman being our composer, it was Thomas Newman's father who generated that starting intro. So I wanted to keep it that because of that.
That's fantastic. So now tell me, your very first shot is
the battle between good and evil. So
and there's a black rider. It seems to be a black rider.
Yes, but at that time, of course, is not the Nazgul yet in his mind. Is what we follow in the story is how, And the trickiest part is, how do you portray the mind of a genius? How do you portray how Tolkien formed this story? So in the beginning, of course, he's in a hole in the ground. That's his bag end, unfortunately.
I never thought of that. You actually started him in a
It
hole
is
in the ground.
it is in the hole in the ground. That's a
I never
hobbit.
thought of that.
That's a hobbit in the hole in the ground. Yes. And
Now, for those fans who don't know and they have not read the Humphrey Carpenter biography, Professor Tolkien, as a young man, served as a signal operations officer in the Battle of the Somme in France. And he took ill with trench fever, as many of his compatriots and fellow soldiers did. And at this point, this is where we find him very, very sick and recovering. And he still receives a letter for his friend, Jeffrey Smith.
Oh, actually, yeah, it's from his friend's mother,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith.
Yes.
I forget her first name now. But I found actually that Mrs. Smith did write to Tolkien, and that was quite intriguing. Of course, there's not that much documentation of. There's a nice book by Jordan Garth that documents some of the events in his war, but he didn't. He didn't keep a diary. We don't have actual documentation. We know that he went over the top, which means that you can basically do the big charge once when I think it was the Hessen line they took over, and so he's experienced that, being there, doing the impossible. But there's not that much documentation of what actually happened. But what we do know is that actually Jeffrey Smith, that became his closest friend in Oxford, was stationed quite close to Tolkien. So it would be natural for Mrs. Smith to write to Tolkien. Jeffrey Smith was very suicidal. He would write odd letters to his mother, and I believe that there's a letter where I haven't seen it later, but I believe this is what you have to kind of skimming research, like what's dramatic. It is dramatic if your friend is in despair, if your friend has problems, you're worried about the friend, and there you start with the theme of friendship. So you have to kind of build the scenes so they surround the themes, how friendship defines Tolkien as a character.
Yes. And yes, indeed. Now, see this shot right here? This is my favorite shot in the entire film. That little cottage, that horse and buggy, and there he is, calm Mimi, just walking towards the house. It is so evocative of the region and the time. I love that. It's my favorite shot in the film. I love it. It says so much about...
There's a little bit poetic license there, because, his original home in Sherhole Mill doesn't actually look like that. But
of course.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's intriguing. But, what we did actually in Grant Montgomery, the production designer, did a magnificent job. My idea was that every location should have a Tolkien feel. So, when we later go to we go to the cafe, we go to every location, we go to Mrs. Faulkner's. All of them have somehow a Tolkien feel. So of course you can't do Bag End directly, but you can kind of influence a little bit in these locations.
It is very rich, and it's beautifully photographed. You guys, this is crazy. What you managed to photograph in just a few minutes. We're only in Sayre Hole for a few minutes, and it's so beautiful and evocative. And I need to say something about Ms. Laura Donnelly and her performance as Mabel Tolkien. She quotes Latin. She reads to the boys Sigurd and the Dragon, and she has such a powerful presence in this film. And she's only on screen for 4 minutes, literally 4 minutes. And it's absolutely amazing what she does in the role.
And
look at that transition. Oh God, this transition.
Two Towers of Birmingham, for those who don't see, the cinema experience kind of reveals that. At that time, I think one of the things that Tolkien did mention about his life was the transition and moving into Birmingham from his own shire, from his own Hobbiton, a beautiful countryside, and then entering this very industrious. And at that time, the Industrial Revolution, of course, affecting. It was black. It was very chalky. Even though he moved actually to a suburb of Birmingham, the suburb as we see suburbs now are not equivalent to the times of that time. Suburbs were dirty and they were messy, and the thing was, of course, what was very beautiful. I tried to get it in, but it was actually a walking distance from Father Francis. His cell, as comes from the old, how monks would describe their housings, his cell at the Birmingham Oratory. So he would walk there daily. I tried to kind of find a way to put that in the script, but again, there's no conflict. They had a very good and very founding, a strong relationship with Father Francis. And the tricky was that if you take let's go here.
Yes, this is it, where she's reading to her boys.
So Mabel Tolkien was a huge influence, of course, to Tolkien. He taught Tolkien languages.
When he was very young, she taught him the classics. He didn't like Greek so much, but he was really interested in a lot of other languages.
He spoke 4 languages at the age of 4, I think. And I only spoke 3 languages at the age of 4, so I lost by 1. But I mean, but Mabel Tolkien was, when you read about the stories and the effect of Mabel, and she was a very inspirational figure. She was actually very artistic, but of course in that time it was very difficult for women who didn't come from a rich family, or it was very difficult to kind of perceive your artistic dreams. So I think her influence in Tolkien's life is it's probably less told in his biographies than we tried to kind of get through that one scene. Again, it's like when you do an adaptation, it's like, okay, we don't know if this happened, if he had a magic lantern. But the thing is, how do you convey to the audience Mabel's inspiration to Tolkien?
You broke my heart right here at this spot. And again, I think it's a testament to the writing and the skill of the actor that Laura Donnelly could make such a powerful presence and such an emotional impact when she was only on screen for 4 minutes. I love it. It's just very powerful. Anybody, any child who has lost a parent will feel the immediacy of that moment. It's beautifully done.
Yeah, and being an orphan defines Tolkien so much. I mean, he lost his father, Arthur, at the age of 4. He loses Mabel at the age of 12.
They're dependent on the kindness of others. Yeah.
Exactly, dependent on kindness of others. All those themes we can see those in, Turin, how, in Silmarillion, those who read, how many homes does Turin find, and then, and always welcome, always, if you look at his stories and you start looking at Frodo being adopted by Bilbo, look at the stories, it's there. Even though, again, in the preface of The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien said, he doesn't like allegory, but he also admits in the same preface that still the writer is affected by, I can't remember the exact phrasing in English, but affected by the events and experience of his own life. And I think those moments are tragic high points how he was defined.
I love Father Francis, portrayed by Colm Meaney, but I've loved him since the days of Star Trek, The Next Generation, and Deep Space Nine. I love him as a performer. He's great.
Colm it's intriguing because if you would really, really dramatize Tolkien's story, the classic way to do it would actually make Father Francis a more malevolent character. Beating the boys, more of a classic. Actually, I was suggested by that in the writing phase by someone, I can't remember who, that, while Father Francis beats the boys, and when Tolkien tries to meet Edith, that's, he, whatever, the cliches are numerous, where he would close the boys, Tolkien in the closet or something, and that would generate conflict, what you need in drama. So,
I've never heard of that. I've never heard of any.
No, he didn't do that. No,
never.
No, he never. That's the point. That's my point. Like, you can take poetic license in a film, but I think you have to be truthful to the character. You can change years, you can change locations, but you have to be truthful to the character. And I know that in many biopics or many real life stories, the characters are changed to adapt to the drama. But I didn't want to do it. I felt at some point, okay, that would help the drama. And I think I even like thought about it for 5 minutes, but it was the right way to go, to be truthful to Father Francis' character.
Indeed. Young Tolkien, portrayed by Harry Gilby, you can catch a lot in his eyes. You can tell the young man is frustrated very deeply because he doesn't want to be reliant on other people. You can tell by looking at this young man, he already dreams of being completely self-reliant. It's written all over his face. And I find that really fascinating to see that so early.
This is you know, we're doing films, of course, multiple people. So I think we had half the boys actually when we shot the scene, and then I just multiplied them. And
This is the one where I feel Harry is up against Snape a little bit.
One thing, just to be honest, I had that wrong. I think it was John Garth. I think it was John Garth who had to explain me how it's pronounced. I had a couple of lunches with John, to do some research, and I think it was John who actually taught me like the correct pronunciation. And even though I had that wrong, and I pronounce Tolkien, but it's Tolkien.
You know what?
You do it with 1.5 E. Yeah.
I hate to say this, but I've spent an entire lifetime correcting people on the pronunciation of Tolkien. It happens all the time.
Yeah. But I did know that it's not Tolkien, which a lot of people do that. But I mean, it's why is it relevant? Why is that scene relevant? It's not gimmicky. It's because language and pronunciation was very important for the professor, and so thus the scene. Even though I think in some of the responses were like, okay, this is a funny, intriguing thing, but it's actually tied into the character in Oxford and his love of language and how things are said. And here we see it.
I love the way he upstages everyone.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that he was able to do that at that age, just reciting books out of his mind. This is
of course he would.
Yeah, just remember him.
Yeah, one of the reasons why Father Francis had such faith in taking care of Hilary and John was that they were very bright, and he knew that those boys could go somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that people, you think about Tolkien being a scholar, and the classic portrayal of him like smoking a pipe, debating about elves, and with C.S. Lewis, at Eagle of a Child. But he loved sports, and he loved the masculinity and the masculinity of rugby, and and some tell stories that he was a fierce rugby player, tackling, that he
really,
that it was a fierce rugby player, and they actually met. Originally, it was Christopher Wiseman and Tolkien, who TCB's first meeting was with Christopher Wiseman and Tolkien on a rugby field. That was the first meeting. So you could think that, but it's tricky on a rugby field, like who's who, and you can't like go, you could do Guy Ritchie where you just stop and say, this is Christopher Wiseman, future TCBS gangster. So you have to find a way to portray how rugby plays a big part in their encounter. And
indeed, well, you took the heat from the earlier scene, the earliest friction.
So just to be clear, we had to have. I'm a Game of Thrones fan, and of course, George R. R. Martin, being a Tolkien fan, you kind of build some Easter egg to some extent. Owen Teale being in this movie is an Easter egg, even though I love he's a great actor. But also, I wanted desperately find someone from the Game of Thrones cast to get into this film. So that world and that combination with the classic, like, what's 1 + 1 is 3.
That's great, and that is Owen Teale playing the headmaster.
Yeah.
Boom, mic drop. Everyone in the
For me,
audience at the premiere went, ooh. The whole audience went, ooh. That was great.
for me, I was bullied as a child. I was a loner in many ways. Um,
Mm,
and kind of acquiring friends, the memory of acquiring friends as an outsider, as Tolkien was. And I think being an outsider defines him a lot. I think the forming, becoming friends with TCBS was very emotional for me personally.
yes.
And I think, uh, and how slowly it must have felt. He comes to King Edward's. He actually in real life he was there for once, and then they pulled him out. They didn't have the money to be there. Then they brought him back in. Then he comes into this place. He kind of hangs out with the cool kids. That
Mm.
suddenly you are an outsider that is a colony boy.
Can
And
can you tell me some more about the visual motif of all the mirrors that you have used in this scene
yes,
and in several others in the film?
yeah. So we had this idea that how does Mrs. Faulkner watch? I mean, we don't have documentation that she would have been an awful person, but she was being paid for watching this kid. Father Francis actually pays Mrs. Faulkner to watch over these kids. That's how
Mm,
it goes, because he
mm,
can't take them into his
mm,
church, into his oratory. So then you have this person that actually earns money through kids. So I find that conflicting. I couldn't portray her as an evil person, but then we put these mirrors that they kind of become kind of CCTV of that
mm,
era.
mm,
That you could watch through mirrors of that era. So it's kind of a subliminal thought of like she's watching over all the
mhm,
time. And
mhm,
in real life, them being together, Edith and Tolkien, Father Francis wasn't happy at all because it would distract, as in the film. It's very accurate that as in the film, that distracts Tolkien from his studying.
yes.
That means that someone told Father Francis. There are rumors whether it was someone seeing it in a village or whether this is Faulkner. So I think that kind of being watched over was, how do you portray that?
I'm fascinated by the use of music. His first attraction to Edith Bratt is not seeing her, it's hearing the music. And that brings me back to the Silmarillion, where all of Tolkien's mythology is based on music. And I thought perhaps that was deliberate, that, that Mr. Young John Tolkien hears the sound of beautiful music and it attracts
Yeah.
him downstairs to his destiny, to see
We
her.
discussed a lot with Thomas Newman about, he's not a Tolkien scholar, but introduced, and he's very intrigued, and he's a very intelligent person. And I discussed about a lot about the music of Dainur and the Elvenish tones, and also music being actually relatively important for Tolkien. If you look at his books, there are songs, people sing, and just as I said, the whole world is kind of profoundly kind of made by themes.
Yes.
First theme goes wrong, second theme goes wrong, and I think it was the third theme that eventually created air. And so what I wanted to gonna get in the film tonally, not just through Thomas Newman, but also all the cues were like there has to be a Tolkienesque feel, whether it's the music of Dainur, what that might feel, or what the elvish tone would be.
Indeed. And now we have moved forward, and this is our first glimpse inside Barrow's stores, where they have the tea club,
Yes.
or what will become the nascent beginnings of the tea club and Barovian society.
The TCBS. And, if there's one thing, I mean, when I was 14 or 13, I think at this time Tolkien's now 14. The others are a year younger than him, and Jeffrey Space Smith is actually, I think Jeffrey Smith is actually 2 years younger than him. I mean, when I was 14, I was driving mopeds and chasing girls and watching really bad flicks. these guys are creating art, and this is true. And I was so envious because this is what happened. You know, they were debating about language, art, poetry, and I'm just, if there's one thing I'm so envious about to this world is that they were civilized, they were read, and we have destroyed this part. And just like I was watching these kids discuss, and this is, I believe this is Stevens writing that dialogue. I was just like this, just debating and pitching and I mean, to be there.
Yes, I agree. A lost era.
I understand. He went,
lost era.
and he went back to that all the time. He wanted to form these clubs. He had different clubs, and you know, in Oxford, I think it's 2 or 3 that he had, the Inklings, but he had others also, and just loved that. He loved that sociality, but that comes out also. Like, you think about the story of being an outsider. You're an outsider. You want to belong. You want to belong in a society. You want to find friends that are very close to you. You want to debate them, and you want to find someone who's, you know, honest to you.
Indeed.
Mimi Keane, playing young Edith, actually has quite risen into fame with the TV show Bad Education, post Tolkien. Yeah, Sex Education, not Education, Sex Education.
Sex Education, that's the one.
Netflix Sex Education show, and she's quite good in it. And she's, of course, in our film, because it's more focused on Tolkien's adult years, she's being underused because of that.
You know, her performance is lovely, and it's really interesting to see such small moments. Those small moments build up to a lot, actually.
So here's filmmaking. This is one of the most cut scenes in the movie, which means that we recut it. And the reason is because people didn't pick up the story that it is Jeffrey Smith's. And I understand it's Jeffrey Smith's mother who's written the letter that we saw in the beginning of the film. And we had to recut it so that the emphasis and the balance is again and again and again, and actually add ADR where Nicholas kind of underlines it more. ADR means kind of, you know, dub additional lines.
Yes.
And because every time we showed it to the audience, they didn't get it. They get who sent the letter, you know, what was he looking at? And this is the scene where we stop and actually explain what has happened. Until this, we've played with the mystery or the intrigue of us not knowing what is his quest. And I believe, I'm pretty sure I recut this even during sound. So we had already picture lock, and I went back to this scene to recut it and add ADR to get it right. And now when you watch it, you're going to kind of forget it. Oh, this was a problem scene. Now just, you know, sometimes that happens.
Fascinating to think that how quickly these boys go from talking about parental authority and this very playful metaphor of the stick, and we quickly advance to
Did you get the stick?
Yes, I got the stick. I got the stick. Oh,
it's only a few people who get the stick.
I got the stick. It's very boyish to go from complaining about parental authority to talking about beautiful, busty women, and then daring your friend to go over to the waitress and do something stupid. It's so perfectly attuned to what I can imagine student life was like at this time in the world, in this corner of the world.
Those who haven't read Norse mythology, I think, you know, going back to the stories of Loki and, you know, Hel, Loki's daughter, it's a huge giant woman. Is actually, it's one, if you haven't read it, read it. And you know, the Neil Gaiman version is quite entertaining, and he's done it in a kind of a nice shortened way. But I think, like, one doesn't understand before having read the Norse mythology how morbid Tolkien's stories and how they are. So that, you know, if you go, he's just joking about a place where the dead go, and that would be his normal life. discussing about death at that age and understanding. And if you go back to the Silmarillion, death being a gift to the children of Eru, humans, and I think like death for him was very natural in his life. It was true stories that were very dark. They are not portrayed as, and then how it affects his writing, how death and reformation of death and loss is somehow intervened in every aspect of his writing in his life. That's why it was kind of chosen that a line of passage in it.
Yes. To show his youthful preoccupation with the afterlife of great heroic soldiers, and that idiom of storytelling that fascinated him so early.
This is actually an oath that they'd really pledged. They did
Yes,
pledge
indeed.
the oath. And it was actually,
Yes,
I believe
indeed.
it was Gilson who sent, it's been a while since I read the letters. I believe it was Gilson who sent a letter to Tolkien during war about the pledge and about the first. And then Jeffrey Smith, of course, that letter is in the film. Actual letter is in the film later on about their pledge and about their, that. So he's in his mission post this film. He's in his mission of what they hear pledged about, changing the world with art.
I love this music so much. It is so evocative. And now, very, very soon now, we're going to make a transition from the younger students to the, no, it's a few minutes away. Oh, look at that dragon he drew in his notebook. And yes, here we are. We have made the jump quite quickly from.
And there's an elven woman in the background. So in every TCPS scene, in the TCPS scenes, and also especially in the Barrow stores, there's a hobbit. Then there's kind of a Hurin Schloss, older, wiser man character in there, and then there's an elvish woman. I can't remember what was the fourth one. There's a Numenorian in one of the passages. So they are there. Of course, they're quite hidden, so you have to rewatch it. If Clifford hasn't seen them, then they're too hidden.
Oh my gosh, those great Easter eggs. This is my next favorite scene in the whole film. I love this so much.
One thing regarding this scene.
So, hello, Lily, by the way. Hello, Lily Collins. Nice to see you.
Hello, Lily Collins.
Yes.
How do you introduce the leading lady? Give her 7 minutes of close-ups. This is one of the scenes that when I first read it, I think it was Stephen who wrote this scene. I think it was like, it has to be longer. It's so, it's just so beautiful, and it's everything that is so Tolkien. He uses, that's how he creates. I'm going to stop talking for a while, but that's how he creates. He invents a word. How do you show through love? He invents a word, then he kind of creates a story from a word. That's how and then, using from that word, from language, using then his influences that we see or later see, or he's experienced life, he kind of opens up a whole world. And I think that's beautifully written, so it doesn't feel forceful. And of course, the first idea of Telperin and Laurelin.
This interplay between the two of them is priceless. It shares with the audience so much about what has grown between them since their childhood, and that they share things.
I'm always quite envious about actors and their skills able to perform again and again and again. So this scene, because I knew it's a lot of that, it was a 7-minute scene. a 7.5-minute scene originally. I think we shot it for a day and a half. Normally you maybe have a day or half a day for a scene like this. I wanted to do it in a day and a half, so we were hurrying in some scenes so that we would be able to focus on this, because it's so much about small nuances, small touch, the hands, the right timing of the hands. And you need time for that. But these two were sitting there for almost 2 days, basically speaking the same dialogue. I've never understood that ability of an actor. And every time you have to make it feel fresh, every time. I mean, I would be done in an hour.
I can tell you from my personal stage experience, it's weird. It's weird doing it in front of a camera once or twice. Doing it on a stage in front of 300 people night after night after night, and then trying to find something fresh and new every time is also, it's a weird place to be creatively. It's a strange process.
It's so easy for a director to just come, cut. So I have an idea, and we'll do it differently. And what I'm thinking now, and just then just sit back and where is my cognac and cigar? And it's
you don't. And then these actors must feel every moment, every second, every frame.
Yeah.
Push, be interesting. Find, be in that world.
Do you know what I found most fascinating about
this? He says Mordor there. He says Mordor there. Just for a quick.
Barely.
Just over a moment, he says Mordor. Yeah, he says Mordor.
He slips into Mordor. Yes.
People miss that.
What I find most compelling about watching this film for the first time was that I could never know what it would be like to sit across from that man, John Ronald Reuel, and to see his mind at work. And by watching your film, we as an audience vicariously get to enjoy that for the first time ever, to sit across from a man like that and watch his brain at work. And Nicholas Hoult does wonderful things with his searching his own mind, his own imagination for it. It's wonderful.
Nicholas is quite special as an actor for a director. He's many actors are very committed, but he was shooting X-Men while he was we were also rehearsing after his X-Men shoots. They're more technical, so you can also focus on the next role, which was this. So we would Skype and discuss about the script, and we would read the script and kind of nuances and kind of do our rehearsal. He was in Montreal, I was in London. But then he would actually teach himself to draw, to illustrate how Tolkien illustrated. And I didn't ask that.
Really?
But he wanted his hand to work as Tolkien's hand.
Wow.
And I think he's at that age as an actor when he loves the camera loves him. He can play and toy with the camera. Now he's taking the next step, and we will see great things from him. Indeed.
For any fans who are questioning, the tossing of the sugar cubes is a real thing that they really, really did.
In real life, this cafe was, I think it was on a rooftop.
Yes.
But unfortunately, the Nazis bombed it down, so we couldn't shoot there. So sorry. So we had to find it. Plus, we were shooting in Liverpool because Birmingham was quite destroyed by the Nazis, and so we had to find a place. So we found Liverpool, Manchester, as location. So in Liverpool during that time, it rains a lot, so we had to bring it in just in case it rains. The Elvenist dance under a tree, based on, yes, there it is. That's the starting moment of Bernlufin. That is the starting moment. It happened in the forest, not really a park, but
it happened. It happened, I think, a few years later after the war was over.
Yes.
But it fits here, and I think it's so beautiful.
No, 1990. No, I think it danced. The phrase goes, "She danced." I remember the letter. She danced in the Hemlocks in 1914, I think.
1914?
I think it was 1914.
I'll have to look. You know what? I'll go to my bookshelf right now and I'm going to look it up. I'm going to look it up.
I think it was 1914. If I lose this one. In real life, to fill the void of Clifford Boway, just finding the letters. Yes, yes. I should bring my copy also, just to be like, scholarish.
Okay, here we are. Oh, there you go. Yes, you've got it. You've got both of these. Here we go. I'm going to find out where
Eurovision. It's like a Eurovision contest. What does Los Angeles say? How many points? So,
I read somewhere that they already had one child together, the first of 4, and she danced for him. But I'll look for it.
You might be right.
Okay, but no. Here's before I get completely embroiled in this. Did Edith Bratt ever get to go and meet all the other guys in the TCBS? Because it seems like a thing that John would have done to bring her around to meet his friends. But I wonder, it's really kind of fun.
It's a different era, of course. So you don't have that. Like, let's hang out. Let's hang out in the bar or a cafe after school. And she's older. You have to think about that. She's older. She's 3.5 years older. And so I think there's a world where she looked, these are just boys, in comparison. And by the time they were adults, they were already in war, and she was, they had separated, and he was in Oxford. So I'm guessing that there's probably like 1 or 2 meets. I think she does refer somewhere. I think there's a family book. I'm looking at my 20 books of Tolkien. I think she refers to the boys. That referral, he refers how she refers to the boys. It gives you a feeling that they met, and that's the idea of this scene. But I don't think there's official documentation. And that's a difficulty, of course, doing a film of pre-Facebook, pre-social media era. Things are not documented that well.
Yeah.
And but she cared. She was a very caring person. So I think what was very important in that show, the show in that scene, was to portray her different levels. She's the female lead, but it's still a man's story. So how do you portray the female lead character and her temper or her different, her strength and her caring? And that was a scene to do so.
I find it fascinating that Edith is feeling many of the same motivations and the same things that young Tolkien is feeling. She wants to be part of something, and she feels set aside. She feels pushed aside by society and by circumstance that she desperately wants to change.
Think about this scene. So one thing is that Tolkien is having trench fever.
Yes.
So
grand hallucinations too.
How do you portray that's, so that's not, of course, yet any of Tolkien's dragons. It is Fafnir. It is Fafnir, the story of Sigurd that we've seen Mabel portray. Yes. So trench fever, and there is documentation that while he was still having trench fever, Tolkien actually started writing The Fall of Gondolin in the hospital. So that means that in this world, he started hallucinating, and in this hallucination, he's seen stories. That documentation tells you that, or actually, hints that. So how do you tell how the mind of a genius works? So how does he adapt? And that's what the story of Sigurd and Fafnir portrayed through Mabel. So we see him adapting it later during the film. So he sees a white knight. He sees Sigurd, being the knight that then actually falls into turmoil. And that during the corruption of his mind during war, during Tolkien, then it turns into Black Knight. So it turns into internal battle between the good and the bad. So it's not a Nazgul yet, but it's basically a white knight, basically a king, you know, becoming dark, becoming death, becoming evil. So we try to portray those visions, and you know, there's subliminal. I don't want to force it too much, and like how his mind works. That he's slowly building his first story, that then, you know, eventually he writes.
Indeed.
Same thing. When I was at their age, you know, being 17, 18, I was thinking about getting into clubs. These guys are reading poetry.
Reading their own poetry.
Yes.
This is an important moment where it is a suggestion of the Greeks and love of comrades.
Yes.
In relation to Jeffrey Smith specifically and his poetry. That was deliberate.
So
yes,
there's debate, and especially Stephen Beresford, a second writer who wrote also Pride, a very famous movie about gay liberation in England. Stephen has read all of the material that he was able to acquire from Jeffrey Smith, and he's pretty sure that he's gay. But we can't say that outline. So how do you portray a character so you don't insult a sexual minority group, you know, without mentioning that he might be, or most likely is during his reading material? And
yes.
How do you portray the characters? So at the same time, what if he isn't? And so I think there's a world where camaraderie is not sexual, but it's love.
Indeed.
So we kind of went in there, and I think then you are again coming back. What's true? You can do poetic license, you can change scenes, but you want to be true to the character as much as you know, and that's where you do. You know, you are actually accurate in history.
Indeed.
So we wanted to portray and respectful towards Jeffrey. If he's looking in the afterlife, if he's looking at us in, you know, the halls of Mandos, he's looking at us.
Yes.
You know, he's like, okay, guys, I get it, what you did. I understand. Thank you. You know, in
Absolutely.
which either way, and you want to be respectful towards him.
Over the many years, Sam and Frodo have been singled out as having a relationship that many American readers or Western American readers don't quite understand. Why is Sam so busy kissing Frodo on the forehead? You know, things like that. And the suggestion of homoerotic relationship between Frodo and Sam was something that I addressed personally in a popular article that I wrote called "In the Closet, Bind Them," where I did actually discuss the Greek idea and the Greek concept, the classic ideas of comradeship and love of your comrades being more necessary for Frodo and Sam, and that it was not to be extrapolated as romantic or sexual love in any possible case, but it was more classic and more Greek, I think, in Tolkien's perseverance of that theme of affection between these two male characters. And that indeed, I'm glad to see you also bringing that about in reflection with
you know,
your characters.
And let's say, and it's most likely that Tolkien, you know, had a gay friend, most likely. So out of respect, understand, Frodo doesn't have a love interest. Sam has, you know, in Lord of the Rings, and eventually ends up having a family. And I think that's one of the most beautiful moments at the end of, you know, the trilogy, where just Sam returns home and he's back. And he's home, and it's you know, it ends the Tolkien theme of finding a home, finding a family that was so important for Tolkien. But at the same time, Frodo not having a love interest, there is a world. I understand what you mean. There is a world that it's a kind of a appraisal towards, you know, those friends who at that time very often chose a lone life. That is totally possible.
Yes.
But we can only guess. I don't know. But in regards of when you touch characters, when you read about characters, and you know, there are letters, and there's of course Jeffrey Smith is actually published, or it was Jeffrey Smith's mom who published the poetry eventually with Tolkien's foreword.
Indeed.
you kind of find bits and pieces, and you start, and that's our profession. You start to analyze. You start to read people through hints, through emotions, and something. It's something that we do, and sometimes, you know, if you're sure, you follow it. If you're not sure, you find a way to kind of be there in the ballpark. Let's talk about Wagner for a moment.
Oh,
So
yes. Okay. You cracked a joke earlier a few minutes ago about why does it take 6 hours to tell a story about a magic ring? That was a beautiful joke.
yes,
That's it. It's so subtle.
beautiful joke, not written by me, but the writers.
Yeah, let's talk about Wagner's Ring of the Nibelungen, shall we?
Yes. So Tolkien, of course, has said in a letter to a fan in this book that, you know, I believe it was a letter in this book. Oh, gosh, it's a long time I read those. But that especially this opera was not an influence towards the Lord of the Rings. Yet at the same time, and he's denied it. Yet at the same time, we know that he's watched this. We know that, you know, music was a big part of their lives. So of course those stories affect. So what you're trying to do here is that what we're trying to do is not pinpointing this is it. This is how it happens. People who know that, you know, how actually the idea of, and he's explained it in his preface, how it happened and how he built the story. But you try to show how an artist is being influenced, how it's being built. And these moments, and one thing that I could not get in, and I hate that I could not get in, is in Oxford, Tolkien portraying characters. You know, he was on stage, he would dress as a knight and scare people. And I tried to find a way, like, how does that scene come into Oxford? And maybe it's, you know, they're drunk and, you know, they're having fun and they're having merry times, as Tolkien would say about his Oxford years.
And he starts shouting the first lines of Beowulf at the top of his lungs.
How exactly? How do you get that in? But it didn't find a place because it's about loss, and this time the theme is about loss of Edith and friendship, of course, with Jeffrey Smith being there. So again, so this was kind of the way of getting it in, that he loved this. He loved to put on a costume. He loved, and this is, you know, to all those fans out there who dress up, they have their characters. Tolkien loved that. If you didn't know that, he did the same. He would dress as a knight. I think that was his character mainly. You know, so he, you know, it takes a little digging from Edith here because you build it around a conflict. But I'm sure in real life, he would just like, yes, let's play this. Let's put on costumes on, and there's no documentation of where the first kiss happened. You know, he wasn't a man who would express those things in his letters or his diaries. So this is an adaptation of how I envision it happening.
Yeah, well, Professor Tolkien writes openly in his letters about the sufferings that he and Edith, and I found a passage right here where he speaks about the dreadful sufferings of our childhood, from which we rescued one another.
Yes.
But could not wholly heal the wounds that later often proved disabling.
Yeah.
And
they both had to sacrifice. They were orphans. They were orphans. They were suffering, and they mentioned there's grief a lot. And these people find
rescuing each other.
Exactly, and these people find in each other souls that are similar. You know, they have both have artistic desires, and they, you know, they spent the rest of their lives together. And they, you know, I love those images of them being old when they're just so happy.
God, yes, in the rose garden together. Those are my favorite pictures of them.
Every image is like just light up and like together. This old amazing pair.
This is another one of my favorite shots where you put the feathers right in front of the camera. I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
Thank you. This is to our Danish cameraman and cinematographer, Carsten Jacobsen and Lasse Frank. This was their idea, the feathers.
Can you tell me about this long tracking shot, if it is indeed if it's called a tracking shot, where you pull the camera down this hallway on that. It's just so beautiful. And
Yeah,
it,
actually,
it, it
sometimes
feels like you're losing these people further and further distant in time as the camera pulls
yes.
back. Tell me about
So it
that
is.
shot.
So
It's
it is
amazing.
accidental. So it's an accidental shot, actually. Intriguingly, it is Carsten Jacobsen, our Steadicam operator, Danish man. I love to bring the Vikings in, of course, in a Tolkien story.
Yeah.
So you have a classic pullback, but then he has this ability of just doing it. Just went further. It just went further. It just went further. And I didn't want to shout cut. The whole crew were like, "We're not shouting. Let's move. Let's see." And of course, then later on, I graded so that it's Tolkien's themes. Also, if you come back to Silmarillion, is about light in the darkness and how darkness plays. It's such a vital element, light, and there it is, kind of his light in the darkness of his life.
Yes.
The end of the shot.
It's very powerful to me, and it is appropriate to feel as if two people who are trying to rescue one another from a miserable life feel like they're isolated together in their romance, as if they're in a bubble together, separate from the rest of the world, and it really encapsulates that.
It is that, and that I held on to that shot throughout the edit because it's their whole life was that. We had versions of the script where we had more of their secrecy, how they would find different ways to meet the secret, but of course the running time of the film at that time was already way past 2 hours, so you're looking at what's the correct running time.
And now here we are at my
one shot tells everything.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Dome. Well, I was just going to say this is my favorite scene of very specific historical tension between these two characters.
Yes, and this is very factual. The events are very factual in here. There's actually it did bother Father Francis that Edith was not Catholic. It did, he actually forbade them to meet. It did bother Ronald also, John Ronald also, and he was tricky, and that's why basically he subdued it, that she's not Catholic. Father Francis is providing everything here we see is factual. Of course, it's difficult for him to admit. Some people have read it that he, denies Catholicism. He doesn't do that. He's denying his father figure, saying that you can't meet the love of your life. And of course, at that point, anyone who's a parent knows, okay, they'll go to any lengths saying like, it doesn't matter, her religion doesn't matter, or whatever, you go to any lengths to fighting for your love. And
yes.
And he plays, Father Francis, of course, plays like God on my side, the classic God on my side, and Tolkien must subdue. So like the Catholicism, coming back, the Catholicism is very in Tolkien's character throughout the film. And of course, respecting, if Tolkien would not be Catholic in this film, he would now go against Father Francis, denouncing his, Catholicism. So like his religion is very internal. It is his. He never doubted his Catholicism. He's never doubted his religion, and his choice to not to be with Edith is part of that. And
this is fascinating because there's so much conflict with Father Francis, who realizes that this young man cannot change his life unless it's through academic success. And all the important things, John Ronald will not have the success of his life, according to Father Francis's idea, unless he sticks to the books and makes an absolute success of his academia. Otherwise, what future does the boy have? And he senses that John Ronald is about to throw it all away over hanging out and partying with his friends and hanging out with a girl who's distracting him. And I believe that Tolkien is facing a father figure when he never had one. And so there's more conflict between these at that moment. I love that. I love that scene.
And there's a parental issue there. Father Francis has promised, and this is factual, he has promised Mabel Tolkien to take care of the kids. He won't be there. He has I believe it was a sherry farm in Spain that his family had. So he had some money. He used those money. He was a very good man. He used those money with these two boys. And he knew that he won't be around, he might die the next week. This is not an era where people lived until 80 or 90. So he knew that this boy, as he pointed out, you are worried about a boy and you understand that pain, and those choices are difficult, and it almost destroyed one of the greatest love stories that I've encountered.
Agreed.
Luckily not.
She held him in her heart until she no longer could, and she realized he was forced by circumstances.
One thing, about the scene. So we are of course surrounded by the army of the dead to a certain extent, and it was difficult portraying how much horror Tolkien saw in World War One, because the trick is that how much can you show so it doesn't feel exposition. So it's not like it doesn't feel like you're underlying in the audience. Yeah, I get it. War is awful. That it feels somehow internal, and that one thing that people don't know, that in the water there's a lot of chemicals. Because World War One was the war of chemicals. So
the mustard gas.
Yeah, everything. They just threw everything. Oh, we invented a chemical that might kill people. Let's throw it in. So all that, of course, by rain and with everything, it was everywhere. And just to adapt, you could get, it becomes so normal for you. You're surrounded by these awful elements. It was tricky finding a balance where you don't overdo it, so people will not go against you. Like, it's just trying to be, an awful place, like the Mord of the Marsh, the Dead Marshes. And I think Grant Montgomery, again, coming back to Grant's magnificent work, is that he found a way of being very subtle, yet kind of being poignant. So this scene is a combination. In Tolkien's real life, this is what you do when you do adaptation. In Tolkien's real life, he did actually end up in jail because he had a fight with the local people in a pub. He had a merry time. He actually himself said that, that time was tricky. I can't remember the exact frame, but doing Oxford, he wasn't really being very religious. He was more focusing on partying, as young people do. So you try to combine in one scene so you don't have 5 scenes expressing different things of his pain.
Yes.
Losing Edith, yet at the same time how his life in Oxford was, that he would actually end up in trouble, that he actually had a fight with some local pub people. We did have the original, the local Oxford people. We did actually have the original scene in some version, but when you read it, it felt like, we in some version, like, you had the pub, and I can't remember what was the debate, what they started debating with some local boy. And ended up, of course, having a pub fight, police coming in. Then, as we see, coming out of the jail. I can't remember why.
I never knew that Tolkien fought with someone and ended up in jail overnight. I never knew that.
Yes, I mean, I think they usually I don't think they put the Oxford boys, the university boys, or didn't put that time in the jail. They're more like, take your name in, and we'll notify the rector in the morning. I think it was more like that, but it is factual.
Well, here we see the first fractures, or maybe perhaps there are some greater fractures between the 4 friends here in this scene, because 2 of them went to a different college.
This is true. They were in Cambridge, and it's mentioned, from time to time. Of course, they do Cambridge banter,
and then they end up playing against each other on the rugby field.
Which is a factual event. That it was, as John Gard describes in his book, The Great War. I think he's talking The Great War. It opens up with the scene that it was the last rugby game against Cambridge and Oxford, and I can't remember who it was. Whether it was Gilson who had already stopped playing rugby, but came back, a comeback, a classic big story, player comeback. For this one game to fight his old nemesis Tolkien, and so I wanted that scene to be, after reading it, I wanted to see that scene to be then also portray their life, that they would meet, even though boys were in Cambridge, they were in Oxford, they would meet. They were very close. They would have their TCBS meetings and travel for it. And at that time, traveling from Cambridge to Oxford was probably 2.5 hours, maybe even 3 hours.
The
But you,
the
yeah.
the after effect of, oh no, please tell me about this letter. He's holding on to that letter for a long, long time, and we see it in shot after shot after shot, and he doesn't mail it until he is about to go to the ship and leave. Tell me about that.
Yes, and he waited. He promised Father Francis. I can't remember why we cut that line out, but he promised Father Francis basically, okay, until I'm 21,
Yes.
of age, I will not, contact Edith anyway. Yes, Father Francis forbade him. And then on the day that he is 21, he sends the letter. And,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So of course we don't follow dates and that, but he did wait. Kind of the idea of that is to portray that he waited all that time, and in real life he did wait that. And I believe the phrase was, I wrote you to every day, but I was only able to to send it once.
Wow.
And the rest of his life he was counting the days and the letters, and it was very beautiful. And their love, his love towards Edith was very profound. So the idea, of course, we are portraying it through war. We're portraying that, but that it's kind of an adaptation. So you don't. Otherwise, you end up having exploratory dialogue where you explain, like, now I'm 21, I can write to a voiceover that comes while he's writing, and all that stuff that I hate in movies. And so this is more of a poetic way of doing it. The letter waits there.
Here in this scene, for those Americans who might not understand what it means when you're a student at Oxford and you are, quote unquote, being sent down, and this happens to Tolkien, and this is called rustication. It means that you're temporarily expelled from the school, and it says here, in more recent times, it means to temporarily leave your classes for welfare or health reasons. So any Oxford University student who is being sent down, they're being expelled. And I want to just bring that in because it's an idiomatic expression that not all Americans might get.
In Tolkien's case, it would have mean that he loses his scholarship, which means that he in real life, in actual life, he would have not been able to afford to be in Oxford, and we would have lost a great man in arts. What we did, we tried to implement it in, but we couldn't find a way to do it in a dramatical way. It was actually Tolkien's professor, or was it even director, tried to help. And actually, if I remember correctly, it was actually the director that introduced Tolkien to Professor Wright. And then I think Tolkien went into Professor Wright's house, and they talked gibberish and gibble-took languages, and impressed Professor Wright, and he was like, okay, I'll take you in my class and I'll give you a scholarship. So of course we wanted to, rather having a scene with rector saying, you need to meet Professor Wright, then he goes to meet Professor Wright, influences Professor Wright, and then that's too pedestrian. So what you of course build, and this is where we come to adaptation, you build it in a dramatic way, how it felt, how it actually must have felt to him. Like, I'm not interested in the greats. I don't give a damn about this. John Garth mentioned that he found information that Tolkien, I believe, took only one book out of his own studies in the library, because they have all those old records. Yes. John has, of course, gone through those. Just one book out of his own studies, and then all the other books he took were, about, of course, the things that he was really intrigued about, mythologies and languages and all that. So it was what is mentioned there is factual, like that he was not interested in his studies, and he needed to find another place.
Indeed,
his real place.
In that previous scene, we just saw the introduction of Jeffrey Smith's mother, played by the outstanding Genevieve O'Reilly. The women in your film, Lily Collins, Genevieve O'Reilly, and of course Laura Donnelly playing Mabel. Yeah. You have three of the most impressive, strong women in this film, and it is wonderful that you were able to put these women into this film in a male-dominated story. I just love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Go ahead.
So
there
we
he
just,
is,
by the way,
Professor Wright.
Yes, Professor Wright, and actually the other professor shouting to Professor Wright is the person currently, Andy, who is Orchard, who is currently holding the chair that Tolkien, then eventually was in Oxford. So and Andy was a great help being consulted during the film, but that's his cameo. We also,
Really? That's his cameo?
That was difficult.
That's great. I didn't know that.
Andy Orchard, yes, the same professor or his chair, and I can't remember whether this actually is in the same room currently. His same room where Tolkien was. I visited the room, and there was like all kinds of Tolkien stuff over there. Anyway, and then the second thing, of course, is that those who know, that's the first phrases of Kenya. He shouts some words in Finnish, and he's starting to speak. He's starting to form his languages, and this was pretty much the time when he started doing that.
So that was Quenya, and it was not Sindarin, it was Quenya that he was beginning to speak?
So he had a few words of Finnish, and as you know, Finnish is the basically the inspiration for Quenya. And he was during Oxford when he encountered Finnish grammar and Finnish language and the Kalevala, our mythology here in Finland, which I have somewhere there in my shelf. And then, but I tried to avoid too much sitting by a desk.
Yes.
And it is because my friend bantered me when I took on the film Tolkien. And he said, "Oh, you're doing a film about Tolkien. How are you going to make an interesting film about 2 hours and a guy on a desk?" And he's like, so in the fall down of the second act, he drops his pencil. That's the big conflict of the second act, turning point. The audience stammers. So
that's so
based
funny.
on based on that banter, of course I'm joking in terms of avoiding being on the chair, but it's true. He's a filmmaker also, but he's right that it's quite interesting just watching a guy on a chair or sitting on a chair writing or dribbling, dabbling. So you try to find ways of how to portray him through languages, through uttering, through sensation, and that was one way of not actually sitting on the chair, him having a book of Finnish grammar, writing Quenya, but actually shouting it out. And those who know, those who don't, it's just a way of expression of pain.
What appeals to me the most is that such a formative, strong relationship with Professor Wright is something that you introduce by this incredibly drunk embarrassment. Isn't that funny to think that Professor Tolkien would meet one of the most important and influential people in his life when he was on a drunk, raging bender? It's really funny.
Yeah, and I do agree that's stretching the poetic license. Because I'm pretty sure he went into Professor Wright's house probably carrying 8 really big books, and then to impress the professor. So I do agree that I'm stretching a bit the poetic license there. No. But
I love it.
It had to be said. Why we do it is actually to tell Professor Wright's character that he's not an evil or how would you say, you call a frigid person that you were drunk, you can't take you in the class. So you actually tell, because that was Professor Wright. When you read about, I think there was actually a biography written about him. I couldn't find it, but I wrote I read passages out of it. And he would, he was very much kind of like that, art fellow, merry, speaking languages to people. He would command his dog in old Celtic languages, old Norse languages. The dog would understand. People would think that he's German, and during war that was a bit of a problem. And he was like that. That's the character. So you build a scene to introduce that this is a beautiful, as you said, a father figure, an understanding father figure, the one that Tolkien needs at this stage of his life. Yes. Father Francis in Birmingham. This is the one thing that he's looking, trying to find. And Frodo not having a father, Turing losing his father, looking at those histories in his books. The father figures and the parental figures are very important to him. And I would love, and my father would be that, he was very read. He studied in Yale, and he would be that. He would accept me drunk. That's okay. Son, let's look at what's behind that drunkenness. What's the character behind that? And that's what Professor Wright is doing. And thus we create him a very accepting, understanding character.
Tell us about Derek Jacobi and how you approached him and him coming into the project, because he's such a living legend, such a legend.
So he loved the script. Then I think we had one phone call, and that's what often happens, like with actors who are 80 and done 108 movies. They don't try to make themselves important. So very often, you have actors that want to discuss, and that's fine. He's like, one phone call, how do you want me to do it? I love the script. I love, I think he saw one or two of my movies or something. And then I told him, that he's, a scholar, but he's actually from Yorkshire. So he's, perhaps that he, how his language comes out. Like, okay, great. And then, I think we met once before the shoot, and with all the other actors, we rehearsed. There he comes on set, does these 4 or 5 minute monologues, and that's 108 movies to you, exactly how you told him on a phone call, and doesn't make himself important, doesn't go like, and you're like, can I have another take? Yeah, sure. So there's the professionalism that is quite amazing.
Tolkien was very well known to love his long walks around Oxford, and I'm so glad that you managed to incorporate an entire scene of bonding between these characters, and you incorporated it in one of those famous long Oxford walks.
Yeah, there's a couple. I think there was a couple more planned, but our schedule in Oxford was very tight, and I think we cut some out, which is good. I don't think they would have survived the final cut.
Well, it's a lovely homage to Professor Tolkien, because that was one of his favorite things, was to be in that
so many of
environment.
as you pointed out, many of the things there are. It's a film that I've done with respect through a fandom, and so many things in this film, even though they are not perhaps accurate, or even though they are adaptations, they are done through a lens of this would be him. So kind of thinking that if he's smoking a pipe, in the afterlife, looking at this movie, he would go like, not badly done, son. It wasn't that bad. It had some really exciting moments in it, sir. Boy, that kind of, if we ever meet in the afterlife or something, that's the best response that I will love.
Oh.
I think it was a bit too short. It will go like, I think it was a bit too short. So it's done through love. It's
now to come back to how these young personalities continue to support him, and this is great, that all these boys are close enough to John Ronald that they know his possible future better than he can even see it. That's essential. So, that's essential to friendship.
Exactly. So again, if you want to do a Wikipedia movie, you have a scene where Rector says, introduce, go to Professor Wright, and he goes to Professor Wright. But this is, I think, the brilliance of the writing from our writers is that you are able through these scenes, additional scenes, kind of like lengthening the sequence to tell again what the friends actually meant. They were a supportive group until the end, and of course, as pointed, through letters, even post their life, post-mortem. And I think that's something so beautiful, having friends that love you so much that they are there always for you, and without any selfishness. And I think that was very evident in PCBS.
You can watch a historical. Oh, go ahead.
I was worried about this scene. That do people get it? That, you know, like he's speaking Old Norse, he's changing languages, and then this, and they actually understands everything. And I remember that first time in Los Angeles with the preview test audience, and they got it. And I just like, I don't have to explain it. I don't have to translate it. I don't have subtitles. They got it. It's there. They get it. And that was one of the great moments of watching a film with an audience to, you know, feel and understand. Okay, to understand what's going on.
I may have actually been one of those people in that test audience.
I do remember. That's the first time we met.
Maybe 19th, I was there.
19th of June, you know, throughout the years, Clifford, 19th of June, 2018.
Now, this relationship was so formative and so important for Tolkien. You can't imagine where his life would have gone if it had not been for him establishing this relationship with Professor Wright.
This is true. Professor Wright actually was one of the greatest influence, and I think it's not that much mentioned in different biographies. I mean, it is, but it's because language is a defining. I think Tolkien himself said that he's first and foremost a linguist, and secondly, a fantasy writer. And, you know, and so much of his, and that was mentioned earlier, so much of his creation comes out of language, about creating a language, as he points out. And, you know, creating a language to people, because that is culture, that is history, that people own something. And I think those are things and elements. I mean, I can only hope and believe that it's factual that Professor Wright was there to discuss this with Tolkien about his hopes of being a creative writer at some point. His first creation did happen in Oxford. The story of Kullervo, he was kind of started doing Oxford after he found Kalevala, his own version of it. And can't remember what was the other one from the Silmarillion. He started writing in Oxford. Now my mind, the father of a 15-month-old, tricks me. Blank.
Tale of Erin.
Oxford started. Was it Arundel that did actually start in Oxford? I mean, we mentioned that. Exactly. It was Arundel. Exactly. The start of Arundel, kind of the first steps of the Mariner. The first steps
Correct.
of the Mariner. Yes, that was true. It was in Oxford, and that's what we hinted in the film. When he was lying, that's one of the most Christian moments actually in the film. When he's lying in the ground, looking at the skies, looking at the Christian star, which is, you know, if you look at the Silmarillion, that's one of the most Christian moments in the Silmarillion, of the star of Arundel, you know, the Mariner on the sky, you know, guiding the way. And of course, that is so Christian. So when he's looking at that star, it is kind of his Christianity and his remorse of adapting and, you know, approving Father Francis, saying no, the conflict and the inner conflict is quite. I didn't want to like explain it, but unfortunately, I'd had to be explained.
This
the moment when people become wraiths.
Yes. Now, I find it fascinating, the quote that he's continuing to read over this. Here lies our Lord, entirely cut to pieces, a good man in the dirt. Can you tell me where that is from? No, that's okay. If you can't, that's all right. We'll find it later.
I should know it by heart.
It's fascinating that he's continuing to read while the prospect of war is washing over the campus. And I did find a quote here in letter number 340. When Edith danced for him, it was in a woodland glade filled with hemlocks at Roos in Yorkshire. And that was for a brief time in command of an outpost of the Humber garrison in 1917. So that was when she danced for him in 1917.
Lost that one.
That's okay. I knew I'd find it eventually. But this is fascinating. Do we know if there was such an evening as this where the boys were all together?
This is actually, we have combined scenes. So the last TCBS meeting was in London, the London Council. This was just before the war, before the men embarked the war. In real life, Tolkien actually left 2 years later. He left 1916 when other boys left 1914.
Yes.
He did, yeah. Because he needed to finish his studies. He was, as mentioned before, he was a poor boy. He needed to graduate. He didn't have the same opportunities. You know, the other kids, they weren't rich, but they were from good families. So he didn't have the same opportunity as the other kids. Jeffrey Smith's family had some kind of family. You know, they all basically could have been helped by their parents, which Tolkien would not. So he wanted to graduate. He was a bit of a pacifist, I would believe. So we did take poetic license that he kind of go to war at the same time. Yeah. But the last council of the Theseus was in London. But we know that they had that. You know, they had that we're going to war, and so that scene of thinking that this might be the last time did actually happen.
It is poignant. And I remember a portrait of Tolkien where he had a mustache grown out, just like Robert Gilson's mustache.
So I'm mixing two letters and two events. So in real life, when he actually went to war or decided to go to war, enlisted, he then contacted Edith that I want to marry you. Actually, in real life, met Edith's fiance. That would have been a great scene.
Oh my gosh!
Yes.
Yeah.
Sitting. I believe his name was George Friend.
Yeah.
So in real life, that would have been an amazing scene. I really wanted into, but introducing a new character and just for one scene where they're sitting kind of very Tolkien-esque, like shaking hands, like, so I'm taking away your woman, you know, she will be mine now. I'm sorry. Very gentleman, like, but let me buy you a pint of beer. And here's, by the way, something I've scribbled and written, whatever. You know, here's a gift. Of course, I'm joking, but that scene would have been an amazing scene of, like, I am here to take your woman, you know, I'm between this. But
I know pistols at 20 paces, maybe. That's what I imagine.
Yes. The dramatic version of that would have been like, exactly, let's meet at dawn. Let's meet at dawn. Choose your weapon.
Oh,
but you can't introduce a new character that you don't then ever come back to at this point of the film.
True.
So of course you change. But she did, I believe she did then dance when they met at the train station. They walked to the trees, and then she danced to him. It was something like this. I'm maybe mixing two events. I'm just trying to defend my loss here.
No. It's quite all right. But you're in really like classic golden age of Hollywood territory with this tearful goodbye at the moment where a man is sent off to war and a woman has an unknown future. And it's, you know, it's everything that I want from a costume drama is this right here. It's everything I want. From it's something that even Miyazaki creates a scene like this in The Wind Rises, where the lead character is running through a train station, trying to find the woman he loves, and it's just right before the war breaks out. It's just it's very evocative of the time.
I believe the name of the ship that he went to war is not actually Ascanius, by the way. I vaguely remember because we then changed the time being 1914, then I think whatever the ship he took, I can't remember, he did leave from Folkestone.
Was that ship in the background? Folkestone, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, Folkestone is the city, yes, and then of course the ship is VFX.
The ship is VFX.
Okay. We didn't have a warship of that size. That would have been nicer, more Marvelish budget. But I think I'm a bit of a goofball. I agree with you that I'm a bit of a goofball in these very classic scenes, and I'm a romantic person myself, and I know it's for some people it's a bit too much, but I just love this scenes of films. I think coming back to Thomas Newman and one of the favorite films he's composed, Shawshank Redemption, it's a Hollywood classic in its form and telling, and you watch it 11 times, and you know that you're being manipulated to cry. You know that, this scene is going to make me cry. He's going to do now. Tom is going to introduce this and this, string, and I'm going to cry, and then just allow yourself. And I'm a bit of a romantic in that sense.
A little bit of melodrama never hurt anybody in a period piece, really. Now, this reminds me of 1917.
One thing that I toyed a lot. This is the moment where Tolkien fell asleep and he actually wakes up in a hospital. So I toyed a lot that the whole sequence here is a dream. So that is the moment. For those who've actually seen the movie, for those who haven't, I'm spoiling it. So with sound design, I told like, okay, everything vanishes. And then Sam coming back, it's not really a Sam. He's just imagining his Batman being Sam. His real name is probably not Sam. He's just Private Hodges. So it's kind of his dream and his feel and emotion of what war is. And then he wakes up in the hospital having this dream. So we lose in sound everything on that moment when he closes his eyes. Basically all this is just his hallucination in the hospital.
You entered into the cinema in a year when a lot of World War I was being depicted in Wonder Woman and the fantastic coverage that Peter Jackson gave in his documentary, They Shall Not Grow Old.
Beautiful.
And more recently with 1917. And this fits so perfectly in alignment with all those great moments. And it's given all of us right now a fresh perspective on the Great War.
And one thing I have to thank Searchlight Pictures for financing this is because, this is an expensive scene and not something that Searchlight Pictures often finances. And them wanting and them allowing someone to portray World War I through how Tolkien would see it. Again, you are there's poetic license in this, but this is how his vision of it, his influences, his kind of how he sees it. You're trying to tell, like, as a Christian, of course, like this is. And there's the kind of the first steps of Morgoth, him seeing things and doing his bane, element, something that then later on he uses. Of course, these you don't want to say the rates, different forms that are white, you don't want to say that this exactly. He saw an explosion in the war, and then it becomes a Balrog in his mind. No, that's not the point. The point is that we're trying to show how he sees the world. There's a lens. He has a lens kind of like coming between reality and his mind, and he kind of in his mind kind of sees the things and changes, and then later uses them in his writing. Now, kind of coming back to this story of Sigurd in his corruption, in Tolkien's corruption of his mind, the white horse, the hero Sigurd, has now changed into a dark knight killing people. So you feel that you're part of the killing. So he feels that it is an enemy, or is it himself killing these people? Am I turning evil? There's a lot of internal struggle going there. And of course the good has been killed.
These elements.
Naha,
Yes.
the horse. Yes.
So beautiful. But these elements are a visual playground, which is, the best. Look at that. And then the light goes out and the sword crashes down onto that.
The good is killed of man.
Yeah.
The good is killed of the man. The ultimate evil is, then he confronts the ultimate evil.
Here it is.
That then eventually becomes in the story is Melkor, who becomes Morgoth, and then it becomes Sauron, that kind of the ultimate evil. There's not yet specifically someone. We named it kind of, okay, let's make a Balrog. But,
right.
But it's because people don't know who Morgoth is when you tell it to, people, who is Morgoth. But it's kind of the idea of confronting an evil that is never foreseen. and that he did confront in the war, and that's I believe very strongly that it affected his writing.
Very much so.
Sorry, saying, yeah.
I was just saying that the tools of visual storytelling and all the things that you have in your toolbox as a director come into play in a way that the visual medium can support ideas that are almost impossible to write down. And this is fascinating to have seen hallucinations and trench fever combined with the aggressive violence and the ongoing horror all around him as his mind is just spinning and spinning into this place. And it's kind of fascinating to see a filmmaker be able to pull in so many visual elements that say so much without having to use any words at all in that scene. It's just really great.
Yeah.
And then now we cut back to this crushing moment where he realizes Jeffrey's gone. And Robert's
And
gone.
then we're kind of,
And everyone's
we're
gone.
trying to hint. Yeah, we're trying to hint that it's all a dream. In real life, he did hear about Robert Gilson's death earlier. Gilson actually he died, I believe, actually on the first day of the Somme battle. There was some, I can't remember, but he died very early. So he would have known about Gils in real life, actually. But, it's just, again, the crush, I think for him, because I believe he actually did sleep 4 days when he arrived in a hospital in Southampton.
Yes.
So when you wake up, so my gut reaction is like, for him, no matter you've slept for 4 days, you kind of like being in hallucination. You don't know where you are. You see these white things and kind of black shadows, and you wake up. Do you feel that it was all a dream? I actually wasn't in a war. Jeffrey is still alive. Robert is still alive. So we're kind of trying to portray his emotion, like, was I there actually, and what did really happen? What, was he there? Did he see Jeffrey? No, because he wasn't there. He's been lying in the bed all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's his emotion, his feeling, his emotional experience of the war that we are portraying.
Is there a further thematic point to Father Francis saying that words are useless at this moment?
Yes. So Father Francis I believe he did have a moment where, I think it was Stephen who added this, and he had done some research of that he did have a factual moment where, he was like, okay, this war is even too much for me, that, words are not, and that of course very much is entwined in one of our main themes about, loss and art, and how art can affect loss and grief. And when people lose, and at that time you need healing, can art heal? And the answer is of course yes.
As the Lord of the Rings is thematically in Tolkien's own words, in one of his letters, he says the Lord of the Rings is thematically about death and the pursuit of deathlessness, especially in regard to the fading and the passing of the elves. Did you find some of that in your mind also as you approached the end stage of this story?
Yes, of course. The thing about it is that he's creating the Silmarillion. Actually, he's writing writing Silmarillion, the bits and bits, while this era. That shot actually portrays Jeffrey's feeling of the war. The one thing that Jeffrey's mom, I believe, was worried about, that Jeffrey had kind of lost the want to live. So and that would happen. So kind of envisioning that maybe perhaps, even though Jeffrey was killed by a shrapnel. And the affection from a shrapnel, but in his mind, Jeffrey's kind of lost the want to live.
Yes.
But answering that, I think, death, finding deathlessness, or the pursuit of deathlessness, is to some extent, it's a defining thing in all of his work except The Hobbit. Of course, Hobbit is very different because, as we now see, it's it's a thing he started telling his kids, and it was more of a fairy tale. It was more of a thing for the kids, and I think all the rest of the writing is actually more about him, and especially Lord of the Rings. And difficulty, of course, is that Lord of the Rings happens. He starts writing Lord of the Rings a bit after the film, 1939, I think, where he wrote the first book. But then the publishing, of course, happened later. I believe it was wrote during the Second World War. Then he finished it I think they wrote the last book 1947.
The Fellowship was published in 1954.
Published, but they started writing Lord of the Rings 1939. It is
17 years earlier.
Yeah, it is in the preface of the book.
That's right.
But so we are not watching a time when he writes Lord of the Rings. He's watching a time when he's creating the Silmarillion in his head, the world, and Hobbit, finding solace, wanting to find an easy story, and that's where the Hobbit kind of starts. From some odd, as we all know, he himself didn't even know where he started. Just like a sentence, and then a whole world opened up from a sentence.
Yeah.
But I think like the death and immortality, thinking about Holomandos in the Silmarillion, and kind of us meeting in Valinor, us having a life in Valinor. I think it's there somehow, very subliminal in his thinking, that there is an afterlife, and we will meet in the afterlife somehow. I don't know. I'm if there is, I'm intrigued to meet him in the Holomandos and
talk
sharing
to him. Yeah.
Sharing a pint, and I've never smoked a pipe, but I'm willing to try if it's J.R. Tolkien.
That's wonderful. I have to say it.
So this scene is actually, I believe it was Christopher Tolkien, one whose letters mentioned that in the 1930s he went to meet Mrs. Smith with his father, and at that time, Christopher, of course, didn't understand who he was. A small boy, so he didn't understand who this person is. He later understood, But so it's intriguing that Mrs. Smith and Tolkien held some kind of relationship years after, years after Geoffrey's passing.
And it's fascinating. I never knew that this meeting actually really happened in person.
Yes,
and I find this scene emotionally devastating to me. It really, really is.
Yes, and in real life, the book was published 1918, but it was difficult to fit in there. I mean, Geoffrey's book. It was difficult to fit in there at that time.
Those little flashbacks to the younger actors just break me. You're breaking me, Dome. Don't do this to me. This is you're gonna make me cry again. You're gonna make me cry again. This is so beautiful. The dreams of youth.
She lost her
so much.
children. She lost her children. Being a mother. We see this today, being a mother, losing your children in the war, continuing your life after that. It is a pain. So, I mean, the book, it's. I think you can buy it online. Geoffrey Smith's book, his poem book. It's very short. It's a pamphlet. I have it again here somewhere. It's kind of pamphlet size, but it's.
But it can be found. It can be purchased online.
Yeah, I ordered online. I didn't get it from his mother. No, but I mean, it's to hold that as a mother, that you have something. I think this was the point of that scene and building kind of that book, his poetry. As a mother, you're holding something. You're holding the art that is left. And I think that's so tragic about all those stories that died, especially World War I being a horrendous war. We lost so many artists, we lost so many voices, and all the poets we lost, all the the musicians we lost, the writers, all the Tolkiens of that time that we lost, the C.S. Lewis's that we lost. I mean, those similar authors that we lost is just horrendous. And having that art and holding that art I hope there was a healing power to her.
I don't have much to say except I need a Kleenex right now. Can you tell us a little bit about Genevieve O'Reilly and how the shooting? I remember you telling this story at our weekend at WonderCon, I believe. But tell the audience now, who may not know the story, about how you got that perfect take from Genevieve O'Reilly here in this.
So Genevieve O'Reilly and then Laura Donnelly and Tom Glencarney, who plays older Wiseman.
Yeah.
They were all in a play called The Ferryman that was directed by Sam Mendes and written by Jess Butterworth. And I saw it in London and basically cast 3 people out of the show. It did go to Broadway with the original cast. And so Genevieve did do an audition tape where she was just mesmerizing. And then we didn't have any rehearsals. Actually, she was an actress that we didn't have rehearsals with. This is true. So came on set, did this. And we knew, of course, that I knew that, okay, they might basically seeing on her audition that, okay, they might be crying. And what you do then is that you usually start with a master shot like this. So we're seeing now from a profile.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's do a close-up. We start from the close-up. And sometimes actors don't want that. They feel like, let's start with a wider and kind of get into the feeling. And I told her, is it okay if we start with a close-up? Because then if she ends up crying and, the makeup goes, and then you might lose something. I've had that situation where in a master shot like this and a wide shot, you had the best take and it's wide and you can't see. And the first take, it was just like the crew was crying, and then we're like, okay, can I take another one? Can I ask another one? I had one slight idea, but then you don't want to do like, okay, I want that 5. I don't want you to do that 5 seconds. Get in that motion and then do 5 seconds. So like, let's do another take. I had this one idea that we could try, and the second take was even better. You're like, okay, we are done. I mean, of course, we did the wider lens.
Fantastic.
So this is factual. This is how it happened.
Yes.
For those who don't know. He told stories to his kids. They were, they had a lot of walks. They did spend time in the garden. He loved his family, hanging out with the family. He would tell stories. He told The Hobbit. And I'm doing the same now with my son, who's 6. I'm reading The Hobbit. I read when she was 5. Intriguingly, this is the one people for the Hobbit fans. He's like, oh, the dragon died. Good, it's finished. That was it. That was it. That was the ending of the book. Of course, like it builds up to the dragon. For him, it was so America. I was like, no, there's, and then there's the Battle of 5 Armies. They're like, okay, maybe Thorin is a friend. He dies. So do I really want to read this to my son? Like, okay, dragon is dead. Good, they get the gold. All right, sleepy. And they're like, they return home. This is great. Now they have, and then of course I know the book by heart. So like, and they just fast forward, and they have this really nice moment with Gandalf and Balin, and that's what friends do. They they eat cake and discuss, and that's it. And so
that's great.
My son's first Tolkien is The Hobbit, of course.
What is this flickering, glimmering on the wallpaper?
Tolkien. So it's a bit of my name and my own thing that he's doing his tests. Everybody knows he's doing the exams, testing.
He's grading his students' papers. Yeah.
Grading the students' papers. Then there's
he finds a blank sheet.
Finds a blank sheet. This is very factual, and we had a version with Nick that he actually like flips. He's testing, and he's just doing the exams. And there's an empty paper. What do I write a sentence? But then people didn't really get it. Is this sentence those who don't know the story? Is this sentence in regards of the exam? He's writing notes or something. It was confusing. So you have to build something like he's getting idea. It's kind of like
yes, okay.
So you plant that his idea is formulating, and
there's the last word, Hobbit.
In his writing, and coming back to this ending shot, in his writing, in Tolkien's writing, is the shadows are reoccurring things. things are in the dark and they're lurking in the shadows. The shadows are there just constantly. So it was just a small thing that I wanted to implement, like the importance of shadows in his imagination, like seeing what's in the shadows. So I left it quite open what he sees in the shadows. He sees something in the shadows again, and then he writes the opening sentence of The Hobbit.
Fantastic. And this music still just fills my heart. And the decision to put in these title cards, epilogue, I guess they're called epilogue cards here at the end, really brings it all around, brings it full circle, so to speak.
And yeah, I mean, I think this is his afterlife. Again,
well
shadows.
done. I'm clapping for you. I'm clapping for your title. Yay, that's
again,
great.
Through shadows, his stories come, and the vision. One thing about Christopher Wiseman. So Christopher Wiseman, actually, as in the title cards, did live until 1987, and they post-war they tried to keep in contact, but then they kind of lost that. And I believe again it probably is in the letters of Christopher Tolkien. I can't remember where I read it. Again, Christopher describing that Tolkien did go to meet in his older age, when they're nearing death. This is probably late 60s, early 70s. I think it was post Edith dying, so he was alone, and he understood that death is coming, and he goes to meet Wiseman, and I believe it's Wiseman's daughter or stepdaughter that walked with him in the garden. And Tolkien talked to the daughter much more. Yeah, it was a stepdaughter. Tolkien talked to the stepdaughter much more than to Christopher. So you can see that, like that everything that is there is such a big gap. Just you've lost friends and there's darkness there, and you don't want to go there. And according to her, I believe it's actually her writing, it was the last time they met. And it was a tragic meeting, them walking the garden and not really discussing. And I think that pain, maybe the pain was just too much for them. Suddenly you're meeting someone, all these memories come back to your life, and you understand what you've lost. And again, about loss. And then you don't want to encounter that, and you rather talk about, young and lively things, like the stepdaughter. She has a life ahead, and what you're doing, and being in Again, like coming back to the Lord of the Rings, it's 4 hobbits that, they go on a journey, on a quest. In real life, the TCBS, I think they had 9 members total. But for Tolkien, he was very accurate. He always demanded that it's just us 4. And he actually, I believe, he wrote letters to Gilson, to Cambridge, that it should be just us 4. So in his mind, he always saw that it was just the original 4 founding members. And the additional members, I believe they did come later during the Oxford years, or just pre-Oxford. But he didn't really see them. He just saw those 4. That was it.
Fascinating. Tell me, how many months of research and then how many months of production? Let's just talk about while the credits are rolling, let's talk about some of the practical things. You were in principal photography for how long after you were writing?
We had a 45-day of principal photography. That's pretty decent for a drama.
That is.
That's pretty decent. It's pretty decent for drama. It's the longest that I've had. Tom of Finland was 41, and that was shot in 5 countries. And, it was a big production in that sense, that it was so spread. But 45 in one country, in England, Liverpool, Manchester, and Oxford, was pretty decent for drama. But at the same time, you're portraying war. So in a bigger budget movie, it would have been 70 days because of the war. But I think it was decent, and I'm very happy about it. I think the research part was 2 parts. One, of course, I've read in almost all of his books, and many of them twice or even 3 times. So, you already have that research there. And then I think the big part of the research then was going into the character, because intriguingly, even being a fan, my kind of vision of him, every time the Finnish papers would write about Tolkien something, was always about his debates with C.S. Lewis, and sitting there and the Inklings, was more focused on that life. So your vision about the characters, like, here's the jolly fellow, everything is so nice, hanging out in pubs, teaching his, shouting hot so people listen, all those stories you've heard numerous times in articles in the local paper. He's, which is listen for those who know. And you read those stories where even students that were not his students would come and watch his lectures because he was this odd figure talking about, all things and stories and myths. So that was my vision of him. And then you start reading about him, and you're like, okay, it's actually all this tragedy that he's encountered, and I think big part of the research was meeting like people like John Garth or Andy Orchard, who holds the same chair in Oxford now at Pembroke College, and discussing like who was this character. And then you read everything, and what in the research to finish this off, in the research, what you have to find is that what is not mentioned. So Tolkien doesn't in his letter discuss that much about his mother, and thus you understand that is a pain. Often what happens is that that is something like he doesn't talk about that. He doesn't openly talk about his feelings or how he felt. So there's something there. There's pain about those things that are not mentioned or barely mentioned. And that was a big part of the research, kind of reading everything through a different lens. What is not said, what's between the lines. Then it's just writing this, writing, rewriting. So everyone knows without writers, we do not have anything. So thanks for our writers doing a huge job. And of course, they did their own research. And then it's just, doing the film. A big part of the writing was actually the VFX, because the fantasy was something I wanted to bring in more and more during the production. Yes. So a lot of it was like actually during the shoot, I would already, rewrite or kind of write additional scenes with VFX that were not on the script. And because a lot of it was through emotion, like, okay, he's going through this emotion, this sense. So what is the VFX? So what is the world that he sees that could portray that emotion? And then you kind of rewrite a scene so that it fits that world, and we're portraying him being, fantasy writing and not just any author.
Yes. Well, now here we are at the end of all things, Sam. Here we are at the end of this. This has been extraordinary to watch
and
this
I'm back
over again
at home.
And you're back again at home. I am too. We're all back at home. But Dome Karukoski, you have, and I'm not blowing smoke up your skirt. I'm telling you seriously, you have inspired a lot of people to go back to reading the books. Even our editor-in-chief at the OneRing.net, who felt very disenfranchised and admitted that he was separated from fandom for a long time after the Hobbit films, and he felt so reconnected again. Our own webmaster at the OneRing.net was so inspired by this movie, as was myself, as was many, many other people I know, to actually reinvigorate our curiosity to who this man was, what happened in his life in these formative years that presented, that mulch, that creative mulch in the back of a brain that becomes creative power for someone. It's wonderful to see it's wonderful to see this come together, because I never thought I would see a day when anyone would bother to dramatize boring, old, stuffy Oxford professor and tell a story of his life. And you managed to do it with such poetry, visual poetry, and emotional grace. So thank you from the bottom of my heart as a fan for bringing that emotion and that, that beauty to understanding, this man in another context that we've never understood him fully. it's one thing to read a little bit of Humphrey Carpenter, but it's another thing to see Nicholas Hoult with all of the wheels spinning in his mind as he creates a story and words, and it's really wonderful. So, are you feeling good about this a year later, about what you've accomplished? You really should. You really should.
I'm feeling good. I have one last story to finish it
tell
off
me. Okay.
for those adult audiences.
Okay, one more story. Okay, here he goes. Okay, we're gonna do this.
Of course, I have all that kind of
Yes.
special editions of all the books. But I thought I had lost it. This is my first Taru Sormusten Herrasta Finnish first book. I went to my mom's. Yes, I thought I had lost it. This is the original. This is the original one. This is from my being 12.
Wow.
So the story of how I encountered the professor was I was being bullied. I was miserable, and then a teacher, I forget her name, and we had like this. You had to choose between mythologies, or kind of you had to write an essay. I believe he chose. I think it was Kalevala was one of the options. Of course, us being Finnish. And she was like, I think you're gonna like this, and it wasn't this actual book. Actually, it wasn't, honesty, but it's a good story, so let's not change it. So let's say again, adaptation. She was like handing out this book.
What is that book? What is that book?
It's just Lord of the Rings, Fellowship.
That's Fellowship.
Yeah, Fellowship of the Ring.
What is the Fellowship of the Ring? Oh wow! Say that again, real slow.
Taru Sormusten Herrasta.
Oh my God.
Sormuksen Ritarit. Taru Sormusten Herrasta Sormuksen Ritarit. So me being 12, being miserable, I get this book.
Wow.
And in 12 you're like, my teacher makes this, Then you have Concerning Hobbits, a bit different Finnish. And like, by weed, and what is this? And then you start. And then you have Gandalf. And then you're like, whoa. Okay, there's a ring. Okay, whoa, this is cool. I mean, and then it's like after that, you go on to these stories, and I think like when you give the book like this to children, and they're like, I think it's a bit with the same with the Silmarillion. Once you get past the first 100 pages, the Valaquenta and everything. So the beginning of the book it's for us fans now, it's amazing, but that time as 12 we're like yeah, when does the story start? You give them, just read it, and you understand your dad or your mom or your teacher, and but it was a great moment for us. It's a great moment. I remember that moment, and the professor's writing has defined my work in many ways. And so coming back to your thank you for your kind words, but I think like the biggest thing for me is to, again, if we meet in the afterlife, that he'd go like, I wasn't that bad. I would have told that.
I love that. You know what?
It had some great intriguing moments. Yes.
I think everything in the afterlife is going to be a lot more egalitarian. I think so. Yes, yeah. I'll take it.
Yes, the teacher didn't give me the books. She didn't give me the book, but she pointed out that you're gonna like this, and I think it's my mother who picked up the book. But the story is better with the teacher handing the book. Sometimes the myth is better than the life.
Yes, absolutely. The legacy that Tolkien continues to leave with us is that it is a book you want to give to your niece or to your child, to your son.
This is true.
These are books you always want to have the younger generation read, and that is such an amazing and peculiar. Not all late 20th century authors are like, okay, here's Herman Melville. You're gonna love this. Read it. No, not really. No 12-year-old wants to read Billy Budd or Moby Dick. It's Tolkien. It's J.R.R. Tolkien.
No, and I think that's the great thing, defining to finish the Finnish and the arc of him actually reading those stories to his kids, and me reading The Hobbit to my son.
Yeah.
They are cultured, intelligent historical. You know, he defines culture surrounding a story, and I think what I love about his writing is that, you know, it's not just a shallow plot, but there's a plot level in it. But surrounding that plot is, as he himself says, you know, there are languages, there are history, and there's a culture of the people. And I think that's something that if we can teach our children to read those books, I think we will then end up having, you know, a higher level of writing, and we service ourselves.
I agree. Wonderful. The verisimilitude of these books is something that reminds us of our own in a wonderful way. The secondary creation, the secondary world of Tolkien is amazing, that it teaches us so much about our own, and that's endlessly fascinating to me. It really is. So, Mr. Dome Karukoski, thank you for staying up so late into the wee hours of the morning where you are in Finland, and it's fantastic to have this time with you. Thank you for being here on the 1-year anniversary of your film, Tolkien, with Nicholas Hoult and Lily Collins. It's fantastic to have you here, and thank you for your spirit and your erudition. Thank you for that, sir.
Thank you very much, Clifford.
Yes, sir. It's good to have you here. We will talk very soon. Goodbye. And we're also going to say goodnight to everybody watching this really long, extended version of Torn Tuesday here on theonering.net. Come back to us on all of our social media, the One Ring Net, on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and everywhere else. And you can follow us every Tuesday. We will have more guests and more wonderful news covering all things J.R.R. Tolkien. And again, this is Clifford. I'm Clifford Broadway, your amiable host. And so glad to have my special guest here, Mr. Dome Karukoski, director, filmmaker, and man about town. What a great guy. It's really good to have you here, man. It's great. All right. It's a pleasure. We'll see you all next Tuesday. Until then, good night and good luck. Buenos noches y buena suerte. Bye.